Rage Against the Vaccine, by far the least anticipated, most feared, and most preemptively disliked episode of the series as a whole so far. Since the episode title was revealed, people have been commenting on how bad they think this episode is going to be. When the trailer released in June, the clips shown from this episode served to scare people even more. Perhaps it was a smart move from the Futurama team to reveal tidbits of this episode early, because as the days went on, and it got closer and closer to the date I had to review this episode, I was more numb than annoyed. I mean, some other episodes I was worried wouldn't end up being that good. The episode related to items you viewed was one I thought wouldn't do a very good job maintaining a good plot while mocking our current social environment with Amazon, but it outperformed my expectations, and was my favorite episode of the new season so far. Maybe this episode will actually be good. We'll have to see. This synopsis and review of the new Futurama episode will contain spoilers, so if you haven't watched it yet, go do that, then come back. The episode opens with everyone at a back to normal rally, with COVID officially eradicated after over 1,000 years. As soon as the ceremony gets underway, a news report breaks that a new variant of COVID known as Explovid was making its rounds among the mutant population. The symptoms included a mild cough and making people irrationally and violently angry. All travel between the world and the sewers was to cease immediately. Right as the broadcast finished airing, Leela came up from the sewers with a cough. As most people haven't heard yet, the ceremony goes on, where Bill Nye is presented an award, the key to the city's liquor cabinet, for his part in helping end COVID. At the ceremony, things go south. When Explovid spreads to everyone in the crowd, making them angry, a riot breaks out as everyone begins to fight one another. After this scene, we get my favorite part of the episode. They use the classic newspaper spinning effect before showing Bender replicating it to entertain Fry. That should tell you enough about what I think of the rest of this episode. Fingers immediately get pointed at Leela as she recently returned from a visit in the sewers. As she's being accused of bringing Explovid to New York, the professor walks in, with new tests he developed to see who's infected. As it turns out, Leela is the only member of the crew infected. She gets quarantined in the Angry Dome. An admittedly funny callback to a far earlier episode. Kif gets knocked up a notch. We see Richard Nixon in a press conference, where he relays that since the virus is anger-based, he encourages everyone to put masks over their ears, and he refuses to listen to any further questions. Throughout the episode, we see people wearing masks in many different ways. We then cut to the Planet Express crew in a Zoom meeting, where every conceivable, predictable bad joke about the transition from office spaces and classrooms to Zoom in 2020 was made. And yes, this scene lasted longer than 15 seconds. The professor eventually just decides that they'll resume business as usual. When Hermes points out that it's a health and safety violation, the professor reminds him that everything they do is a violation. Fair enough. When back in the office, everyone starts discussing their own theories as to why the virus is spreading. Amy suggests that the virus is just a hoax, not even real at all. Hermes suggests that the virus turns people into zombies. He is laughed right out of the office and goes home resolved to get to the bottom of this. He tells his wife that he's going to New Orleans, and she gets excited because it's about time for Mardi Gras. But Hermes reveals his true intentions. He wants to use voodoo to cure the Explovid outbreak. La Barbara warns him against it, but he is dead set. We then see Hermes go to an airport. In this episode, this scene somehow stood out as especially bad. They did a little gag here, making fun of airplane freakout videos that have been emerging recently. It's as funny as you might assume. After this, Professor Farnsworth reveals his vaccine to the public, but Dr. Wernstrom unveils his vaccine at the same time. They start arguing back and forth about why theirs is better, and bringing up all the side effects the other has. This lasts for some time. Fry brings Leela dinner, but because of the virus, she is angry and mean. Cutting back to Farnsworth and Wernstrom, they have now started receiving questions from the press. Dr. Banjo, the monkey introduced in the episode, A Clockwork Origin, comes and accuses the two of making dangerous vaccines. He later goes and posts about it, serving as commentary for misinformation on podcasts and Facebook. Cutting back to Hermes, the plane he's on crashes, as everyone on it is fighting, including the captain, and he seems to be the only survivor. He's initially paralyzed, but once he smells gumbo, he gets up and walks forward as if nothing was wrong. Here we see one of the most accurate portrayals of New Orleans. He makes his way to a gypsy who reads tarot cards for him so he can find out where he needs to go. We get a few scenes here of Hermes going around New Orleans, which was honestly kind of fun. Professor Farnsworth is frustrated that nobody is taking his vaccine, and that the virus is still raging strong. We get a few clips of misinformation online, and everyone is wondering where it's coming from. Apparently it's from Omicron Persei 8. They're trying to confuse humans into chaos so they can easily invade. Fry is tired of spending time apart from Leela, so he goes into her quarantine dome. Of course, because the virus makes them angry, they start beating each other up. Domestic abuse, yay! As Hermes finally arrives at his destination, he discovers that the man residing in the House of Voodoo is Barbados Slim, his natural-born enemy. They discuss what the virus could possibly be caused by. Barbados Slim has already ruled out the possibility of demonic possession, but when Hermes brings up the fact that it could be zombieism, this intrigues him, and he decides to look into it. La Barbara reveals herself at this moment, knowing a lot about voodoo as well. We get a whole lot of jokes here about Barbados and La Barbara running around behind Hermes' back. It was a little funny at first, but got exhausting really fast. Hermes, man, I wouldn't be taking that level of disrespect personally. While this is happening, the Earth is being invaded by Lurer of Omicron Persei 8. They bring a newer strand of Explova to everyone that spreads faster and makes people even angrier. Hermes, La Barbara, and Barbados eventually use voodoo to create a refined cure, which is essentially just a vaccine, and they administer it to everyone, saving the day. The end. Thank God it's finally over. It was Futurama, so not everything was bad, but we got pretty damn close. This episode shared almost no semblance to having a coherent plot. It was just a bunch of random things that remind everyone of what has happened over the past few years. We had some Hermes stuff that kind of served as a plot, some of which was alright. The only things I liked in this episode was Hermes in New Orleans looking for the voodoo house, and like 3 jokes, none of which regarding COVID or any other issue brought up in this episode. Just like random one-liners and visual bits that worked well. It felt like this episode was designed for it to be easily clipped and placed above mobile gameplay footage or a TikTok. I'm sorry, Matt Groening, Seth MacFarlane has a monopoly on that market. The Zoom meeting, the vaccine debate between Farnsworth and Wernstrom, the airplane meltdown video, Dr. Bongo on social media, the swab testing, all things that come to my head when I think of big parts of this episode that don't drive the plot forward at all and feel like they were designed for YouTube shorts. None of the characters felt normal in this episode. For starters, there was times they acted like they barely knew each other. Amy is the one saying stupid things. That's Fry's job. Fry barely does anything. Zoidberg doesn't do anything. Leela, although I understand she wasn't in the correct mindset, beating up Fry was something that felt weird to include for humor. Bender, well, they got Bender right. Hermes randomly deciding to pursue voodoo as the answer, the most absurd thing, just doing his own thing as everybody else was stuck in a jumpy plot, made everything feel weird. This episode was less political than I thought it would be, but probably not in a good way. When I saw the title, I immediately thought, oh no, there's going to be a section of Futurama viewers I'm not going to be able to talk about this episode with. Because this episode pussyfooted around picking a side, yet was still rather cynical, it seems to have pissed off those who care enough in both political factions. I'm not sure why Futurama decided to cover such a divisive topic, where the only way to get a lot of people to like this episode is to just agree with their opinion. I think Futurama was worried about not pissing off either side so much that they forgot to include a plot. I'm pretty sure we're going to see a lot of reviews for this episode that aren't nearly as good as the reviewer is capable of making, because people won't point out the blinding flaws in it, yet instead how it dances around politics and gives too much credence to their opposing side. This episode was like a 3 out of 10 at best. It was almost unwatchable. Is it the worst episode of all time? I think that title will always go to the Futurama Holiday Spectacular, but it was close, and we might honestly get something worse, especially if Futurama decides to include an anthology episode. I'm not sure what to think of the upcoming Zap Gets Cancelled. I think it has more potential because at least we'll be following a specific character and be somewhat grounded, but it could stumble into similar pitfalls. We'll see. As much as it sucks to say this, it's Futurama right now. There's no telling how the next episode will turn out. Subscribe so you can see my review of the next episode, and here's my review of last week's episode. See y'all later.